Just a second, I'll get started here. Sorry, I'm running a bit late. I just pulled into the parking garage over there. I'm a bit sweaty. I'm Ian Lindner. I work in Ames over at Workiva, formerly Web Filings. Anyone in the area probably knows that we've hired pretty much every programmer in the area. But I'm on the Drupal team. Did that shut down? Can you see that? Oh. Okay, I can't see this. Is it just on this one?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. I'm on the Drupal web development team there. I've been doing Drupal for, 3-4 years now. I've been a web developer for well over a decade. I'm kind of a full stack engineer. I do everything from UX to the back-end databases, working on kind of some of the DevOps stuff like Docker. And so Docker is one of these things that I've been kind of interested in. It's kind of the new darling of a lot of the tech community. It's kind of the buzzy, flashy thing. DockerCon just happened. That was kind of big. If you saw the big Lego whale that was all over the social media, that was kind of cool. But so Docker has become kind of a big deal right now in kind of the virtualization, way to host things, DevOps, your local development machine. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about what Docker is, what is this Docker thing and why should I use it? So Docker is a platform for running containers. So containers are not virtual machines, and I'll cover that a little bit. But containers are kind of a way to run an application, all in one on like a Linux system. So you just boot it up and run it, and you have a container that goes. So you can package your app, ship it anywhere. It's kind of neat. And so what is a container? So a container is a self-contained application unit. And kind of what that means is it is kind of effectively a logical box where you have maybe your Apache server and your MySQL server, and then all of your MySQL libraries and everything like that, and you can run all of your PHP stack in there, and that can run there. And then over here, I can have a container with Solr. And over here, I could have a proxy container that runs FPM, it runs like Nginx or something like that. And so I can have all of these nice little discrete units of stuff, of applications. And for someone who likes structure and making this stuff a lot neater, that's awesome. That's what we kind of live for. The cool thing about Docker compared to something like configuring your virtual machines with like Chef or Vagrant or Puppet or anything like that is Docker's lightweight. And so, this makes it just a lot faster and a lot easier to run. And so kind of getting into the containers and, how they differ from VMs, I kind of talked about them being lightweight. And how they're lightweight is they run in user space and they share the kernel of the actual operating system. So you're not booting up a whole VM on top of hypervisor or something like that and running the whole operating system stack. You're just kind of running just a little bit of it, and that's what makes it lightweight. That's kind of the power of Docker, is that this makes it the ability to run possibly even thousands of these containers in what would normally be impossible with the same amount of hardware. And the other neat thing is these are not tied to the operating system. So very much like you can run your VM kind of on any virtualization hardware, you can run Docker containers on most flavors of Linux. I'll get to a little thing about Mac OS and Windows. They don't exactly run on Mac OS and Windows, so that, write once, run anywhere isn't exactly true. But to get a little more into this whole containers are not VMs, I'm not going to pull this up and go through all of this, but when I post the slides, this link to Stack Overflow is going to be on here. And that link really digs into kind of the differences between containers and VMs. And I mean, if you like the nitty-gritty stuff, a lot of it's there. I mean, because they kind of give you a little hint on like the Docker website what the difference is, but you know, it's a website, so they're just kind of giving you, you know, more like why you should use it and you should be using it now. And so back to why we want to use Docker. You know, I talked about this whole lightweight thing. So the containers can be small. You don't have to take up a whole bunch of space that you would normally need for a VM. These containers boot, you know, lightning fast compared to bringing up like a whole VM via Vagrant or Chef or Puppet. Portability, I mean, pretty much anywhere you have Docker, you can run your container. So if you can run Docker, you can run these containers. So you can run these on almost any of the hosts. They handle all of the networking. Oops, little typo there. Handle all of the networking. You know, they handle the networking stack and get all that stuff configured, which makes, you know, our job as developers a lot easier. The Docker Hub has tons and tons and tons of pre-built images. So if you need a LAMP server, you just go to Docker Hub and you get one. And actually, you can just like use some of the Docker commands and just get one. I mean, you don't even have to go out to the web. If you know what they are, you can just run them right from the command line and you have a Docker instance of whatever you want, pre-built, ready to go. Docker is now starting to become a community standard. The Linux container or the lightweight container standard is kind of being adopted. This whole thing is kind of going through the whole sausage-making process of standards. But this is one of the big things that kind of came out of DockerCon this year. So now we've talked about why Docker is awesome. Now let's dig into a little more of the high-level architecture. So as we can see, I talked about like running the full stack of a VM over here. You have, you know, your hypervisor, you have your guest OS, you have all of your dependencies, and then you have your application. On Docker, you just have your Docker engine, and then you have your container with your libraries and your app. I mean, you've cut out that whole guest OS part of the stack, and that's why Docker is able to make things quite a bit faster. So if you haven't installed Docker or you haven't played with it, Docker has plenty of documentation. I'm not going to run through this whole process. They have a self-guided installer. It makes life pretty easy. And we probably don't all want to, if you haven't installed it, we probably all don't want to install it right now and flood the network. So I talked about this whole thing where Docker doesn't exactly run on Mac and Windows, even though they say they do. They do, but you need to run a special VM. And that's called boot to Docker, and that's kind of like a wrapper application around the VM that'll bring up the Linux VM so you can run Docker. Boot to Docker works really well. I found some minor issues where it isn't quite as nice as, you know, running natively on like a Linux system, but it's just something that you have to be aware of if you're just going to run this natively on like, or run it not natively, but run it on Mac or Windows. So basically, the promise of Docker is build, ship, and run. And so I'm going to kind of cover some of those steps, and then we're going to go through some examples and kind of show, you know, what Docker can do. So I have these all out on my GitHub account, Ian Littner, and then my 3D repository for this presentation. Okay. So, oh, I am not mirroring, am I? Hold on one second. This is the fun part. Okay. So I'm going to bring up view presentation mode. Nope, nope, that's not what I want. Hold on. Let's second. Okay, so I'm going to start out with some of my examples here. So in this repository, I have a series of examples, and we really can't see a lot because the screen's kind of small, so I'll move things around. So basically, if you go through the Docker tutorial, basically to run Docker, to run the most simple instance of Docker, all we need to do is run this command, and we have a Docker instance up and going. And so I'm going to run this now and kind of talk a little bit about what's going on there. So I'll bring up my terminal here. Okay, so I'm going to run this example here, and unsurprisingly, like every Hello World example known to man, it printed Hello World. So basically, what happened is when we ran this command, we booted up an Ubuntu 14.4 or 14.04 Docker instance. We told it to run the echo command and then echo out Hello World. That's basically all this did. Most Docker instances are probably just a little bit more complex than this, but it's actually not terribly difficult to get them up and running. So if we want to move through our next major example, we have Docker run-t-i Ubuntu 14.4 bin bash. And what this is going to do is, this is not going to run Hello World. This is going to bring us right into the terminal of our container. So basically the -t and -i, we're using those arguments, and we're telling Docker run bin and bash, or bin bash, and bring us right out to the bash terminal. So nothing terribly exciting yet. But that's how you get into, at least if you want to start up your Docker instance and get into a terminal. That's probably not the way you're going to get into a terminal most times. There's a command called docker attach. But we can go a little further, and we can run a Docker container as a daemon. And this is actually how, let me make this a little smaller so we can see the full thing. So basically, I'm still just running commands through the shell here. But kind of the cool thing is, now I'm having it run in a loop, so the container's just going to keep running. Let me copy this and run this. Okay, so we just saw this big long string of numbers output from the terminal. That really doesn't mean anything to us, but I'm going to tell you that the Docker container is running, but don't take my word for it. There is a way to see what's going on. So if we type Docker, Docker will give us a whole list of commands. And if I type Docker PS, and this isn't very pretty, but let's see if I can make my screen a little nicer here. Let's see if this will. Did that change our? Okay, let's hope that that's not too small, and let's see if we can bring this up. So, okay, is that too small to read? Let me see if I can view. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the other one then. I'm perfectly cool working in the terminal, but for whatever reason, the Mac displays thing has always just never been my friend. Okay, so I typed Docker PS, and that gave me a list of virtual machines. Let me actually, let's see if this is actually any better. 3D. Okay. Let's. Preferences. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this, but I just want to be able to show this kind of in the nice format. Okay. If not, okay. I'm just going to have to go through them here. So basically, we have a container ID, the container image, and what command it's running. And then when it was created, a status, ports, and then on the next line, we have the name of the container. So basically, I have a bunch of containers running here, and I kind of want to know what's going on with this one here. This container has been automatically named Stoic Elion. And so I'm going to go docker logs Stoic Elion. So that just gave us a log of what's going on. And so we can actually see that it was running hello world. And so now we've confirmed that the container is actually running hello world. And that's kind of a way to kind of see, just get a quick view of what's going on within your Docker containers. And then, so if we want to stop our Docker container, we go docker stop, and then the name of the container. And this usually takes a second, so I'm just going to say trust me on that one. Okay, so if we get back into our examples, there we went through the Docker logs name and then docker stop. Okay, so my second set of examples, we're gonna actually build something that's a little more complex. And this is where I was talking about the ability to just pull something automatically from the Docker registry. So I already have a directory here called lamp. So I'm gonna clear this directory out. Or no, I'm sorry, I do not want to clear that directory out. I was example ahead. I'm going to go into that directory. Okay, and so I have my directory, and then I'm actually going to build this container. Okay, bunch of stuff happened, and that's usually what should happen when you build a Docker container, is that, so that will output everything. So basically what we're doing here is we're calling Docker, running the build command, and then I'm saying, hey, build this container. And actually you don't need to be in this directory, I just have it here, I think. But if you don't have like the code and you just run docker build whatever the repository name is, or whatever the account name is, and repository and dot, if it can find it in Docker Hub, it's just going to pull it for you and build it. And that's kind of one of the nice things as I was talking about the Docker Hub. So after you've built a container, let's see, then we can now run the container. And so I'm going to actually run this container. I actually have some containers running that I'm going to have to kill here. Docker halt Bowline web 1, Docker halt Bowline web 2. Oh, I'm sorry. Web 1. Okay. this part is not exactly the quickest thing is actually stopping the containers. But now I can run this command, and we'll actually get something here that actually has some value. Okay, so we've just run this container, and okay, let me go to, let's see if it's up yet. Okay, so what I did here is, if you're actually running in Linux, you won't have to go to this whole host name. But since I'm running on Mac OS, and I talked about that whole boot to Docker thing, I'll talk a little bit about that quickly. Boot to Docker is a container you have to bring up, or not a container, but an actual VM you have to bring up, but the application does it for you, so you type like boot to Docker up. One of the things is you have to know which IP it's running on, so you would just go boot to Docker IP, and that'll give you the IP of boot to Docker. And so that was one of the things that kind of tripped me up the first time I tried to use Docker on my Macintosh, is that I didn't know, which IP it was running on and how to get that, and I had to parse through a lot of documentation. So,
and you have boot to Docker running, and then Docker running on top of that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So essentially, yeah, boot to Docker is just a VM, and it runs on top of VirtualBox. I don't know if it can run on any other systems. I haven't looked, but I think it just runs on top of VirtualBox, and then Docker runs inside of that. And that's just because Docker it can't really run native to Mac or Windows. And that's just kind of one of the things that is tricky. I don't know if that's in their roadmap to be able to get it to run, but I think because of the container standard, it's probably something that they can't run on Mac and Windows just yet.
So I'm trying to understand where the stack is at. You have VirtualBox running Ubuntu or running Docker?
Okay, so VirtualBox is running boot to Docker, which is a Linux VM that's been customized. Okay. So that VM can run Docker. And then my containers are running there. So
you've got multiple layers of OS.
Yes, I do on my development machine. When you go to production, or like when you have this out on production, if you were going to push it out to Amazon or something, you don't have to do that. You just bring up your Amazon like EC2 server, or on like Tudum Cloud, you just bring up that server, and then you bring up your Docker containers. So that's just a development thing that if you're running Mac and Windows. So yeah, no, I mean that was one of the things that when I was first trying to use it, that I was just like, what's going on here? I thought it just ran and brought up these containers, and then I'm like, wait, there's this whole other thing I have to run? It's the one thing that I never really liked, because I was hoping to get rid of VirtualBox out of my stack when I used Docker, and that wasn't what happened. But I will say, compared to using like Vagrant and stuff, I've been so much happier. Yep.
So just so my understanding is with Docker that you have different containers for each of the services, like you'd have a container for the MySQL and for the PHP, things like that. So is there a separate container running Ubuntu that those other containers are depending upon, so that that's where the OS level is coming in?
Okay, so the whole Docker container and like the Ubuntu image and stuff, it's not a true like VM. It is it's part of the Linux container standard, and so it is running that, like it's running parts of that, but it's not running it's not the whole like operating system running on a hypervisor. It's not a true like operating system running like that. So I mean, it's one of these things where it gets, even though you're using Ubuntu and you're able to use apt-get and all of these applications that are running on there, and you were able to get into bin bash, you do have like all the functionalities of an operating system, but they call it a container. So it's one of those things. It doesn't.
What I'm trying to understand is that OS kernel.
Yep.
Is that running within each container, or does the containers depend upon another current container that has the OS stuff?
Okay, yeah, and that is, so it's not running a true like kernel, I believe. It's running like, it's using Docker to be that kernel, but it's running, it's giving you all of the services that you need via Docker, and then that's running in Docker's running in user space, and your container's running in user space. And so I think Docker handles the kernel side of things, and so you don't have a true like operating system kernel running.
So it doesn't have to depend upon whatever OS version you're having on your own machine.
Yes.
Docker is whatever Docker thing is running all the containers that you have running together. Docker takes care of all of the different containers depend upon the one OS version that's running within Docker, so they don't have different OS versions?
No. You can have different OS. The images that you use can be different, and so they are, and that's where I don't know the full true internals of how that works. But everything that they say is that it's not running a true
Sorry,
like,
yeah. Start by side right here.
No, that's fine. And these are yeah. And
My understanding is it only packages what's essential to run that service within that container. And part of the optimization as you're getting is that it's not having to run the whole Linux kernel. So in fact, when you're running MySQL or you're running Nginx or Apache, you don't need all the other things. You just need for that one service to run, and that's what's packaged in the container.
Yeah, I think that's a better explanation, and that's also, I think, because if I bring this up,
Docker is what has essentially multiple.
Well, yeah, the way I understand it, I'll probably just speak to this as well, is that the host system, in this case, boot to Docker, which is an Ubuntu VM, it has the kernel, and all the containers they use with LXC, which is a VM Linux that lets it run lightweight containers, share the host operating system's kernel.
Okay. So then every container needs to be based on the same
Kernel. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be the same like distribution necessarily.
so
As long as it can be the same kernel.
yeah, I believe how it's actually, okay, so I was thinking about this a little bit and how to explain this. So this would be either like if you're running this out on Amazon, this would be your Ubuntu server out on Amazon, this operating system layer. Then you'd have, or this would be your boot to Docker. Whatever's below this, we don't really, Docker doesn't care about really this. It cares a little bit about this, but only that this needs to run Docker. And then so once we get to the Docker engine, Docker handles I think all of the normal like operating system tasks of like scheduling processes and all of that fun stuff. So all of the traditional operating system tasks, Docker handles. What I think the container handles is it gives you your applications. So even though the container is an Ubuntu container, you're not necessarily running at the very core of it, you're not necessarily running that kernel or that compiled kernel. You're running like the applications that come with Ubuntu, I believe. And so you're going to have like apt-get, you're going to have bash, and if you pull apt-get, like lamp or whatever, you're going to be running all of that. And so, and that's how it runs in user space versus having to be a VM. And so, I mean, I bet there are plenty of discussions that probably will explain this better than I can. I really want to dig into it, and because it's really cool, because Docker uses, I think, Google Go, which is kind of a neat language to begin with, but I think there's some really cool things in there. So I think I'm going to move on from there, but and defer that. That's my best understanding right now. So, and I probably just left everyone more confused. So, kind of back to where we were. So basically, we just brought up, with that last command of docker run, we just brought up a LAMP server. This is, running LAMP servers, all well and great, but now we want to actually do something with this lab server we just ran. So I'm going to go back in to my command line and pull up my next example. I need to Docker stop this again. There's probably a script out there that would just pull like an awk or whatever script to pull the actual name of the container and then just stop all the containers or something like that for your dev environment. Oh, that's fun. I hope I spelled that right. It has some really fun names. My favorite that I've seen so far is Backstabbing Babbage. And so, let's see, is this the one that I want to do? Okay. So Tudum lamp. Is this the one? Okay. Okay, so that's why I have that build in here. You know what? I am missing an example. I'm not going to find it here. So I'm going to come back to this, but basically the example that I wanted to show that I don't have the command offhand is, and I am really disappointed that I forgot to check that in, or it went somewhere else. Basically, the command that I wanted to run here was, and I'll just talk a little bit about what the plan was since I don't have it offhand, and I'm not going to take the time to look it up, is basically all I was going to do was tell the Docker app to pull a Git repo that just had like a simple PHP script, and instead of running this basic default app, we were going to run the actual PHP script. I'll publish that in my presentation. I have a couple of errata, and I'll probably do some research on that and have a little more information on the Docker and the LXC container standard, because I am a little more curious about it now. So I'm going to get back to the presentation because we're at 1:36. So let me see. Okay, we got this back up. So basically, we kind of roughly covered the build section of creating your own Docker containers and how to actually use those to build apps. We'll get a little better way to build things because kind of the examples that I was going through were kind of simple, just kind of giving you kind of how the Docker command line works and how to use Docker to bring up a container and just some of the syntax and the process and how to halt it and all of that fun stuff. So when we actually start to look at getting an actual app or a Docker container or whatever we're building, as I talked about, one of the portions of this presentation is kind of the DevOps section, and I think a large portion of the DevOps is your continuous integration environment and build systems and all of this fun stuff. So basically, there are a lot of new CI systems coming out. You have things like Travis and Snap and Circle CI, and Jenkins has been around pretty much forever. So one of the things that's kind of happening is some of these hosted CI systems, they're like Travis. I really like Travis, and it runs really well for open source projects. You have to pay for your private projects, but it doesn't exactly. They run Docker, but it isn't a full like Docker. I think they support it, but it's not like a full true like Docker CI system, and you probably if you're doing a complex Docker build, it's probably not the place to be doing it. You're still probably going to want to be doing something with Jenkins, or I think Circle CI supports Docker if you're looking for a little more support on a hosted solution. And so that's one thing to kind of watch out for is if you're looking for the hosted build system is who actually has full support for Docker and who doesn't. Jenkins, since you're hosting it yourself, you can build whatever you want. I think there are plenty of plugins and things like that. One of the interesting ones that I kind of want to talk about is Drone. Drone is kind of somewhat of a newcomer on the block. It's more of host your own or roll your own CI system. It's kind of a Docker drone CI. And it's probably going to make me. Okay. Probably going to have to connect to Wi-Fi here. I didn't do that. And since my screen's so small, I do not have. Okay. Well, I don't know that network. Wi-Fi connected, AT&T Wi-Fi. Okay. I think it brought it up a couple of times, but I don't know if I actually accepted it. So I'm probably going to have to. Okay. Well, it's 11:40, so I am going to have to. Let's see if I can do this. 1, 2, 3, join. Okay, let's go back to AT&T. See if I can bring it up. Well, this is not going to be, oh, maybe here we go. I'm not going to win.
I think you're connected.
Oh, am I?
Yeah, I think it just does that for fun.
It's just tooling with you.
Yeah, it's just messing with me. AT&T. Okay, so.
Does that look better than the link that was about drone shooting in your face or something like that?
Oh, there's some like.
Page?
Yeah,
Wait, what?
I saw one where this guy attached a handgun to a drone and it used GPS to recenter after he shot. Yeah, there's going to be a whole bunch of new laws after that guy did that, I bet. So I'm going to bring up drone here. So this screen is okay. So drone does have a hosted version. I thought it was just roll your own off of GitHub, but let's take something I want. So they have a bunch of videos on here too. They've done a bunch of good documentations on the videos and things like that. So drone is based on it's based on the Docker container standard. I have not actually implemented drone. It's one of the things that I have planned for like my projects for the next months for like things I want to run, and so it's something that I'm really looking at that I want to use as soon as possible. I mean, it's not that I don't have any problems with Jenkins. It works well for me. We're friends, so it's all good. So I'm not going to dig really in depth into the whole continuous integration side of things, but I just kind of wanted to show some of the options. There are tons of options out there. And the same thing goes with hosting options. Basically, these are some of the major hosts that, say they're running Docker or support Docker. I mean, it's available in quite a few places. And basically, especially after this last Docker conference, there's going to be more coming online this year every day. I mean, everyone who has a hosting company, if they're not supporting Docker, probably within the next 6 months to a year, are going to be purporting themselves to at least run Docker. I mean, it's really if you have servers, you should be able to run Docker. But some of these actually offer extra services. I think .cloud was one of the first, and they were kind of, I think they worked with the Docker team when they were first getting the project up and going. Tudum Cloud is kind of a big one. I know Azure and EC2, and of course JoinNet are kind of some of the big players. But but there's a lot more. This is definitely not a limited list. And so you can run you can run your containers in multiple data centers, multiple hosts, and you can scale them up, bring them down, I mean, there's really no limit to what you can do, and like we kind of talked about, like you can have Apache and MySQL running all in one container, or you can run Apache in one container, you can run MySQL in other containers, so you can have multiple webheads, connecting to a bunch of MySQL containers, and then have, your master container, and then have your Nginx proxies out in front. So it makes it really easy to kind of build these building blocks and put them out to multiple hosts. And a lot of these are starting to really build tools to help you get these out there and run them more efficiently. But it's kind of like, I'm not going to make any suggestions, hey, go use this one, because I haven't used them all. That would be quite the undertaking to test Docker and see how everything runs on all of these different hosts. And someone's probably done it. Someone probably has the time.
I may interrupt, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is there, say, for instance, a library of containers? If that's the case, and say, for instance, I know as a weakness, I'm not the best at administering a LAMP stack.
Mm-hmm.
Is there just a library? Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yep. And I think I kind of maybe missed this when I was going through the examples, and I probably should have brought it up. So Docker Hub. Docker Hub is awesome. It has tons and tons and tons of containers. You can have your own account, and you can deploy your own containers out there. So just like GitHub or anything like that, it's built and supported by the community. So
is a container production worthy?
Some of them are like Docker official containers, okay. And so those are the ones you probably want to rely on. I mean, if you just find one that's only been up there, a month or two, yeah.
But say, for instance, they had a LAMP stack container, right?
Yep.
There was one database that's a little bit better than MySQL, starts with B, right?
Yep.
They got that whole thing packed up, I can throw it on.
There may be.
I'm not saying it's going to be 100, just like Drupal.
Yep.
It's open source, it's ready to go, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Mm-hmm.
We can similar to that. So a lot of them aren't working.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the case, and it's actually pretty easy to go in there and this one's a little more complex. But so there's what's called the Docker file.
Okay.
And the Docker file is how you build your containers. And we've kind of covered a ton of stuff with the examples and everything. But so just like if you've used Vagrant or other things, there's like a Vagrant file or all of these other files. And basically all it is it tells you what container you're using. Sometimes, we may have the maintainer information, what packages you want to install. So like the apt-get, most of these are going to run Debian or Ubuntu. I think I've seen a few that run Arch and other stuff like that. But these are usually all kind of based off of a couple of base containers, which is the good thing. So, a lot of these are based off the Docker official container, so some of them are just customized versions of those official containers. And so once you really start to get to playing with Docker and you get to the point of like customizing your own containers, you'll kind of get a feel for which ones work well for customizing and which ones are kind of brittle and really just fit the purpose of the maintainer, just like any GitHub or open source project. So. Docker Hub, browse it, look through it. I think there are probably sites that even review some of the stuff out there. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stuff to be had. So yeah, you don't need to build your own containers to start out. And kind of getting into the Drupal side, what I'm going to try to cover in these last few minutes is I'm going to get up here. So the last thing I want to kind of cover in this presentation was, Docker, just a touch on DevOps, and then Drupal and Docker. So this is I guess why we're all here, running Drupal on Docker. So you could run like your LAMP stack, like we brought up a LAMP stack, but there's some better options. And I'm going to kind of cover some of these options. So I said you can run the LAMP stack with Drupal dependencies, or there are custom Drupal containers, or even better, Drupal and Docker utilities. And I'm going to kind of cover a couple of those utilities right now. In my examples, I have a thing that this first container this first container I'm going to cover is called Docker-Drupal. It's out on GitHub. But basically, all this container does is this is a custom build with a bunch of Drupal utilities. And I'm going to run this. Okay. CD example. Oop, where am I? Docker Drupal. Okay. So I'm going to run this example right now. Actually, it's probably going to. Okay. Docker PS. Okay, I'm not running one. So I'm going to just give this one a different one because I already used it. And I'm not going to bring that same one again. Okay, so basically what I just did was bring up this container. And so, this was someone else's container out there. This one may be out on, actually, if it has a name, Bowline/Drupal, I bet this one's out on the Docker Hub, but I know it's out on GitHub. And so basically, all I'm doing here is running a custom Docker container. And we should be able to see if this is running. Did I set this one to a port? Okay. So when you actually run Docker, one of the things that you may specify is which ports are available for different services and which ones are exposed. And in this case, I didn't set this to port 80. This was set to port 8003. So, you could run multiple containers and not have them all conflict on port 80. And so I'm going to go over here. And we have a Drupal site. Basically, we're looking at, one command to bring up a Drupal site from a container. There's not much here, but it's a Drupal site. And so, we can log in. I think it's just admin. Yep, it's real secure. But we can change that with this container. So, and it actually, it actually runs pretty snappy. I mean, it is base Drupal, so it's going to run pretty decent. But it runs pretty snappy running on a virtual machine in a container, which, that's one of the things when I first started, working with this. I'm like, how is this going to run performance-wise? It actually runs pretty well. And I'll pull this up to talk a little bit about Drupal GitHub. Okay. So this is a repository, or you can just pull the container. And a lot of these READMEs on GitHub have examples of how to use the container. The better ones have a lot more examples and troubleshooting and So basically, this Docker container has a bunch of properties, and this really starts to get into the advanced side of Docker, where you're really configuring your Docker file and a lot of the utilities and parameters you can use with it. And so the nice thing about this one is we can define things like the repository we want to pull in. You can also mount directories, so you can mount directories, so you can mount your web app directly into the file system, so you don't have to pull with GitHub. A lot of times, a lot of the containers do just pull the GitHub repo, and that's what you would be doing if you were probably on a production instance. You'd probably be pulling a Git repo in a specific branch, or using your CI system to handle that, or maybe a build system, or like a Vagrant system, because you can use Vagrant and Puppet and stuff with Docker, which is kind of the nice thing. So you're not excluded from everything you've necessarily done if you use those other systems with Docker. But so this one's nice because you have a lot of parameters you can set up. You can say, I want to use my GitHub repo and I want to pull, demo or branch dev or whatever, and name the container and all kinds of stuff. And this one has a great parameter reference. And so this will give you options to set set the admin username, the password, email, all of this fun stuff. So this one's pretty cool. This is it's probably one of the faster containers to just get up and running, and that's pretty configurable and able to pull in like your Git repo and stuff like that. And that's, if you have everything in like features or whatever, and you have your database, so you can pull the database and build it, and then run all of your features. This one would probably be a really good one for using with your CI system with Jenkins to do like a lot of your automated testing or bring things up. So you have a system that's kind of a base clean system that isn't exactly has all of your production or stage or dev data. And that's also one of the advantages, of any VM like build or test system, is that you can bring everything up and then you don't have to worry about all the cruft from your production systems.
If you did that, could you run multiple Drupal Docker containers on one machine?
Yes.
So that you could have one per site if you want to run like 5 sites on a...
Yeah, so if you have, let's say at work we have about 5 to 10 sites that we're working on actively, and so I can have a Docker container running for each one of those sites. And that's where you'd set the port to like 8003 or 8004. You can use like an Nginx proxy to give them all names, so you can use the different, you can use the DNS names and then have it route them to the right ports and everything to do a reverse proxy. But yeah, it's probably easier to just give them the right port numbers and work through it.
So that'd be good in a dev environment where you would specify
Yes.
the port. But what if you wanted to do, would it make sense in production to say, I want to deploy 5 sites on a server, so I'm going to put them each in a Docker container?
Yes.
So how would the port networking work out? Because you want to port 80 on all this in that case.
Yeah, and then that's where you'd have to actually define which ones are running to the IPs. And so I'm not going to pull up the full reference for that, but you can do that, and you can set which ones are using which IPs. Because people...
Routing engineer, like I just use virtuals.
Yeah.
And or something similar like that. But really, in that situation, we have 5 containers going. We've got then 5 separate instances of MySQL, or what I'm saying, wouldn't you be overloading resources if you would?
No. So if you run, you can run just the Apache side of it. So you don't have to run the full stack. So you could just run the Apache and the PHP side of it in your containers and have multiple, so you could host all of your different systems in Docker containers. Or if you're going for like load balancing or bringing up more sites, you can host multiple webheads too. So, I mean, it's definitely not limited in that fashion where you pretty much would have to bring up, multiple VMs on hardware, Oh, yeah, that's actually JavaScript. JavaScript is everything now. But yeah, so you can run multiple containers on a server, and that's one of the advantages of Docker, is that you can spin them up where you need them. So
you have your Drupal container that's running the Drupal stuff,
mm-hmm.
and then it knows that it needs another container that has Apache and PHP, another one for PHP, and another one for MySQL. Yep,
I was going to get into one more container called Bowline. Bowline's a really cool project. I don't think I have the time to dig into all the examples, but, and this is one of the more advanced ways to use Docker, there is something called Docker Compose. And Docker Compose is, instead of just having a single container, you're saying, I want to run multiple containers. And Docker Compose, it was called Fig before, but Docker Compose allows you to define that, well, here's my DB container, and this is all the settings for my DB container, and now I have my web container. And here's all the settings for my web container. And then you could have Apache Solr, in there too, which is like the most awesome thing ever, is being able to pull an Apache Solr container and have that boot up and not have to configure that. If anyone's ever been through that's not a fun process. But yeah, so Docker Compose is another utility, and that allows you to kind of chain dependencies like that. And so you can have all of your containers set up, so you can just have 1 or 2 commands to bring up your full stack in multiple containers.
So if you have multiple Drupal containers for
mm-hmm.
each of your different sites, then, and you're like, have that as a dependency, which sets up its own MySQL thing,
mm-hmm.
then does each Drupal container container get its own associated MySQL container then?
If you want, yes.
Or do, like, if you have multiple Drupal containers running simultaneously, can they share a MySQL container?
Yes, both, if you want. So you can run this just like you could run, VM. So probably the way to think about it is these are just a layer on top of like your VM infrastructure. And so it's essentially, you can run these containers like they were mini servers, even though they're not true servers. But you can run them like mini servers. So you can set them up in any configuration you need, in any amount of stacks or layers, however you need that. And so you could have any number of MySQL containers hosting any number of like Apache and Drupal instances. And so, I mean, there's a ton of flexibility with this, and the Docker rabbit hole goes really deep too. So, I think we're kind of at our. Am I running till 15 or 2 o'clock? Okay, I guess I'll take any more questions. I kind of rushed through a lot of that and had my technical glitches, but we made it through.
Thank you.
Yep.